Ms. Hunter, thank you for giving us this opportunity to do this interview. My first question, I want to ask you about your opinion about the last election. Some people blame the Liberals for what happened in the last election and the defeat of the Liberals against the progressive Conservatives. But some others believe that it's because of the wave of the populist right-wing wave that we're witnessing all around the world and in Canada kind of as well. What do you think happened?
Well, there are no easy answers to that one. It was obviously a very tough election. I am very grateful to the people of Scarborough-Guildwood who have re-elected me for the third time, and it's an opportunity to really see our party and our province from a new lens, which is what I'm doing. When we look back at the election in 2018, we really see that people wanted to have a change in this province. And we had been in office for 15 years, and that's a long time, and people had that sort of desire for change. But I don't think they had the desire for the change that came to Ontario, that we now have a Conservative government that is making cuts to things like healthcare and education that people really rely on, those services. A lot of young people live in my riding. I have a campus there at the University of Toronto and, of course, Centennial College. And many of those students are experiencing cuts to their financial aid through the OSAP program. That's not really something that they had bargained for when they were selecting a government, that they would have imagined there would have been those deep cuts to social services and to other supports that people would really rely on.
Mm-hmm. The part of your answer was about sort of the performance of the Ford government during the past year and what they have done. I want to ask you more about that, but before I go there, I want to follow up on the question that I asked at first as well. What do you think? Do you think the Liberals made any mistake, specifically the government of former Premier Kathleen Wynne? Do you think they made some mistakes as a Liberal? Do you think that they made some mistakes during the election, or was there some kind of mismanagement in the government that caused people not to support the Liberals anymore?
No, I think my answer stands that people had an appetite for a change. I'm very proud of the work that we did as Liberals in this province. I'm the former Minister of Education, and I had an opportunity to see our province in every region, every corner of the province, because education touches everyone. And, we really had a strong record of achievement on education, moving our system that was really underfunded under the previous Conservative government to making sure we invested in education. We got our graduation rates up from 68% to 86.5%, which was a high that I had an opportunity to announce as the minister. That doesn't mean that it's all there. We still have more work to do. On our record, the economy grew. We had the lowest unemployment rate in over 2 decades in Ontario. We saw an influx of jobs with foreign direct investment and companies coming to Ontario to expand. Of course, we have to focus on how we grow our own companies and develop startups, and those were some of the areas that we were looking into. We're actually one of the top destinations for technology companies in all of North America, and people would not be interested in coming to locate here or expanding and setting up companies here if we didn't have the skills and the talent of our people. So I'm very proud of our province. I'm proud of the record of our Liberal government and the progressive policies that we had when it came to healthcare, education, and the environment and the economy. But I also feel that Ontarians wanted to have a change, and they have the last word. The voters have that last word, and what I'm focused on now is how do we rebuild the Ontario Liberal Party and put forward those progressive values, which I believe are actually really closely aligned to Ontario's values. Ontarians want to have a strong education system in this province because we know that that's connected to the future of this province. We want to see Ontario leading all of Canada in GDP growth, and frankly, all of the G7s, making sure that we are a strong engine for this province and this country.
Now about the Ford government. They have completed their first year of their mandate, almost a year and a half now. What do you think about their performance? You mentioned some points, but I want you to talk about the details of how do you think they've performed during the first year. What points in what areas do you think they've been strong? In what areas do you think they've been weak? Especially about the budget and the budget cuts that happened. What's your opinion on those budget cuts?
Well, frankly, I think people are losing trust in the Ford government. It's been a year plus of chaos. Certainly we see that in our school system. Over 140,000 high school students actually walked out because they were protesting. What they saw was a disservice, a de-investment in their education system. And in fact, they're right. When we look at how the government is funding students, they have dropped their funding in education from the K to 12 grades. They're increasing class sizes, and that means that those teachers and educators will have more students in a classroom to deal with, so that's less one-on-one time. And we know that good quality education really depends on the quality of that adult in the classroom, and the teacher has a huge impact on the outcome for students. Moving beyond education, we can look at the environment, and there really isn't a climate plan that responds in Ontario to the climate crisis that is there. We know that young people are hugely concerned about the climate crisis and its impact on the future of our province, our country, and our world, our planet. And we have to do our part here in Ontario to make sure that we reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that we have responsible programs when it comes to saving energy and not wasting the environment, and making sure that we're very good stewards of that. When it comes to how this government handles its policies and its programs, I think that's the most concern that I would have, is that they really rush to implement without thought of impact on people. And then in some cases, they reverse their position. Two examples of that, which I was very concerned about, is the autism program. When we think about autism, it's a spectrum, and children with diagnoses deserve treatment that is suited to their diagnoses. What the government tried to do was to have one size fits all. And that doesn't really work with an autism program. And there was huge backlash, and parents were protesting on the grounds of Queen's Park over that. And the government pulled back after being sort of pushed by parents and advocates. And I know certainly I was part of that. We created a program called Pause the Plan that brought experts in to explain why this change was having detrimental effects on existing programs, therapeutic providers in school, and the concerns. And it was really just saying, just a minute, pause that plan, go back to the drawing board and get it right. Parents and kids with autism deserve better than what you're offering. And we're all waiting now. So after creating this uncertainty and this chaos, we don't really know what the program is going to look like, and we're told that we're not going to know until April of 2020. That's a long time for parents to wait, and for students to wait, and children with autism to wait. Another area that I felt that they were very rushed in making a decision without thinking about the impact was on downloading costs to municipalities. And that affects frontline services like public health and childcare. And, when you think about, what people depend on, they really depend on those services that are provided by their local governments. They want to make sure that our cities and our towns and communities remain disease-free, and that people have access to basic public health services and resources. So forcing those cuts and creating that uncertainty in the system, or putting it on the backs of municipalities to say, well, preserve the service but find somewhere else to cut, that's, I think, unfair to those local municipalities. The Ford government tried to do it retroactively after the municipalities had closed their budgets for the year, and and they can't run deficits. They have to actually balance. And the municipalities really pushed back and said, this is unfair. What are you forcing us to cut, or are you forcing us to raise taxes? Similarly with childcare, and those cuts affect families in terms of the cost of childcare, the availability of subsidized childcare spaces, and certainly the quality of childcare. And there are many, many more examples of where I really believed that this government was rushing, created a lot of chaos. We remember, cutting the City of Toronto Council in half in the middle of a municipal election, and then evoking the notwithstanding clause, which is, something that is fundamental to our Constitution, and you don't want to use on frivolous things. You want to make sure that it's a very serious issue. And yet this government was rushing ahead. So it has created a lot of uncertainty. I think people are losing trust in Premier Ford and his government, and really wondering, is this the right leadership that we expect in our province? Ontario is the most populous province, the strong economic engine of Canada, and we want to see policies that are really investing in people, in infrastructure, and in communities that help to grow and expand the economy here in Ontario and set us up for a bright future.
You mentioned many of the budget cuts that have happened, and you talked about the impact of these budget cuts. But some people say, and we interviewed, for example, Mr. Michael Parsa, the parliamentary assistant to the president of the Treasury Board, and one point that they mentioned, which is correct, factual, is that the province has significant debt. Year after year, the province has run budgets that have been in deficit, and at some point the province must start paying back this significant debt. Do you agree with this? Do you agree that the province should start paying back the debt? And if we should, how should this be done if it's not through the budget cuts? Because the progressive conservatives say that they are implementing these cuts because they want to be more, as they say, fiscally responsible. And a lot of times they actually blame the previous Liberal government and say that they have caused a lot of the debt that the province holds right now. So, what is your opinion on that, and what do you think the Liberal solution should be for a more fiscally responsible Ontario?
I fundamentally don't agree with that positioning. I look at when Premier Ford took over, he inherited a very strong economy here in Ontario. We had the record low unemployment. We had investments that were coming into the province, and when people have jobs and they're spending in the economy grows and expands, and that's what I believe we need to focus on. People want to have that hopeful future. They want to make sure that their kids can get educated and they have good jobs when they graduate. And that's what we were focused on as Liberals. In our policies and our programs, we're very, very focused on doing that. What Premier Ford and his government has done is actually restating the numbers, and to their own purpose. I believe that they want to create a deficit in Ontario, and they're doing that in a number of different ways of restating those numbers. They're also lowering revenues and giving tax cuts that removes revenue from the Treasury. So, of course, you're going to create a deficit if you continue to lower revenues, and that puts additional pressure on giving you an excuse to make more cuts to those programs. And the programs that they're cutting are really vital. They're cutting legal aid, that people who rely on legal aid need access to justice. If they don't have good access to justice, it actually clogs up our court system. They're cutting almost $1 billion out of community and social services. The most vulnerable people in our province are experiencing that cut. And, the excuse that the government is giving is that, well, we have to eliminate a deficit. Well, why are you lowering revenues at the same time as you're trying to eliminate a deficit? So I disagree with the premise of the argument. I believe that as Liberals, what we do is, and certainly I'm, the finance critic, and I've sat on Treasury Board and held large ministry areas like education and advanced education for universities, colleges, and skilled training. And what I believe is that we have to focus on a longer-term vision for our province that continues to make the right critical investments that we need in skills and talent, in economic hubs for our province, so that we can attract good jobs for the 21st century, those new economy jobs that are really geared at advanced manufacturing and research and science and innovation, so that our province continues to thrive and continues to grow, and that we don't go backwards when we've made so much progress. Under the Liberals, we also managed the debt by restructuring it, taking advantage of lower interest rates. So when you look at the average interest rate, we're paying a lot less on our debt than in previous years. And we also have to make sure we have measures like debt to GDP ratios that shows that the size of our economy, our growth in this province, can reasonably manage to service that debt, and so that we don't spend more than we earn or spend more than we have. You have to be good fiscal managers. I think that's something that's really, really important. You have to pay attention, reduce that deficit, have a plan to do that, to eliminate it, and reduce the overall debt in time. But, let's make sure that we're not putting people at risk, especially vulnerable people who need that support, and that we don't get our priorities mixed up, having bumper stickers, for instance, saying that we're open for business, when what we really need is a strong economic plan for our province.
Now, about the Ontario Liberals, you're running for the leadership of the Provincial Liberals in Ontario, and what's your plan? How do you think the Ontario Liberals need to improve or change and basically get ready for the next election? What things do you think needs to be improved or changed in the party? How do you have to restructure it? Do you need new policies? Do you need new faces in the Ontario Liberals? Some people, even some Liberals, say that the Ontario, the provincial party, the Ontario Liberals, they were the party of the establishment, and they have been kind of the party of the establishment, not much the grassroots. How do you want to change that? Do you agree with that? How do you want to change that if you agree with it?
Well, I'm running to lead the Ontario Liberal Party and to be Ontario's next premier. What I see is that our province is preparing for that uncertain future in a world that is changing, and we have to be ready for that. So our province has to be at the leading edge of that change, investments in skills, in talents, in technology, in innovation, and I'm excited about the opportunities that lie ahead for us here in Ontario. I have a 10-year vision for the province, and as premier, that would be my focus on core priorities that will help to advance the people of this province. And I'm talking about the everyday people in Ontario. This is something that relates very much to my own experience. My family and I, we moved to Canada from Jamaica as immigrants. And, my parents worked very hard. My dad had his own business, and my mom, she went to work every day, but always there was supper, and we would sit around the dinner table and talk about our day. And that hard work and that discipline that I learned from my family really translated into how I studied. And, going on to university and my graduate studies at the Rotman School of Management for my MBA, all of that was ingrained in me that this is the place that you can find opportunity, and that opportunity is through the door of education. So I'm very passionate about education. It's something that I truly believe we need to make sure that we have an excellent education system, that our young people are prepared to compete against anyone in the world, and that they will solve the most complex and challenging problems of our time and our day because they have the ability to think through those problems and to solve them. So our Liberal Party absolutely needs a new face, a new voice, and I believe that I bring that combination of experience and a vision that will take our party forward into the 2022 election, and that we will win that election and bring a progressive Liberal value back to Ontario, and that includes all people. Everyday Ontarians, making sure that they are benefiting from the policies that are being implemented by their government.
Mm-hmm. About the immigrant communities in Ontario, how do you think the province, the government, the provincial government can provide them more support so that, for example, many of the new immigrants that come to Canada and they move to Ontario, they have difficulty integrating in the job market, especially when they come with professional degrees from other countries. When they come here, they face difficulties to integrate in the job market. How do you think the provincial government can help the diverse immigrant communities that live in Ontario better than the current status quo? To be honest with you, both under the Progressive Conservatives and under the Liberals. How do you think they can support the immigrant communities better? Because some of these problems that exist today, for example, for new immigrants integrating in the job market, existed under the Liberals as well.
Absolutely. You know, when I look at the demographics in Ontario and in Canada, they're changing. We have an aging population here in Ontario, and we rely on the influx of immigrants to fuel our labor force and to grow our economy. We actually we need immigrants, and we want to make sure that integration is happening as quickly as possible and as seamlessly as possible. And, you know, from the basics like English as a second language programs, and making sure that those services are available. That's a partnership that we have with all three levels of government, in fact, and with our education system, our universities, and our college system. We also want to make sure that, the provision of things like housing and healthcare and all of those services are available. Libraries, as simple as it is, public libraries play a huge role of integration in our local communities because they act as community hubs and centers and places where people are not just exchanging knowledge, but they're actually exchanging social cues and social information that is very, very important. Those soft skills are really important as someone who is new here, strives to integrate into schools, into the workforce. Now, the workforce and the professional credentials is a particular challenge, and I do recognize that. It was something, as the former Minister of Advanced Education and Skills Development, that I looked at, and how do we make sure that as many people as want to continue to practice in their professions get the opportunity to do that, and making sure that the credentialization and the speed at which that is done is a priority. We have to work first with our universities and our colleges that do those assessments, right? And that's important, that we're translating the same information and the same standards of training. So that has to happen. But also our employers have a role to play as well. Before entering politics, I was the CEO of the Greater Toronto Civic Action Alliance. And Civic Action, in fact, looked at this challenge from many creative angles, and making sure that newcomers to Ontario had an easier path to getting those credentials recognized and to getting into their chosen field. In some instances, they would have to bridge that and perhaps start in an adjacent field so that they can get those work experience, because that's something that was always told, you don't have Canadian experience, and they're like, yeah, but I've been, a professional my whole career in my home country. So getting that Canadian experience was something that that we knew was really important, and we developed programs that helped to do that. So it's something that I'm very passionate about, have had experience with in terms of the work that I've done, and would continue to see this as a core priority, because we will depend and rely on immigrants and newcomers coming into this country and doing well in all walks of life.
Mitzie Hunter, thank you so much for your time, and good luck with your campaign.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much for having me. Yes.